the chat as we go along. We'll have time after each speaker to ask some questions. So yeah, please do engage there. And we'll get started shortly. We'll just give it a minute or so for remaining people to enter, and then I'll kick us off. Okay, great. So yeah, welcome to this webinar that we're hosting at the National Retrofit Hub on digital building logbooks and retrofit. We hope that you learn a lot. This webinar is a follow-up to a resource that we recently published on our website, and we'll be putting a link to that in the chat so that you can look into that in more detail at your leisure. So at this session, you'll be hearing from three of us. So first, we'll be hearing from Louis Daillencourt. Louis is Head of Business Development at Novoville. They're a citizen engagement platform and shared repairs platform, and they're developing work on logbooks. Louis is also the technical lead for our National Retrofit Hub Working Group 1. We'll then hear from Nigel Walley. He's chair of the Residential Logbook Association, and they bring together logbook providers with government and industry to establish standards and use cases for logbooks. Nigel's also CEO of the digital building logbook provider Chimney. Then I'll take over and talk you through a new output that we have launched on how digital building logbooks can help unlock retrofit at scale and what the next steps are. So yeah, as I mentioned, please do keep yourself on mute for the duration of the session. So a very short introduction to the National Retrofit Hub. Probably many of you know us already. We're a not-for-profit collaborative organisation that's been set up to bring together everyone working in the retrofit sector to help enable the local delivery of retrofit at scale in line with the National Retrofit Strategy. We do that work by collaborating. We want to engage as many people as possible across the retrofit spectrum, bring them together to empower them to be more than the sum of their parts, to share their knowledge, to make sure that we're not overlapping on work and duplicating efforts, but really adding to what one another are doing. And through all that, we want to facilitate really good collective leadership and governance. The majority of our work's carried out within 6 different working groups. These are all on our website, and you're welcome to sign up to any of these. Working Group 1's the group that has been producing this work around logbooks and really engaging with this space. Working Group 1's thinking about how do we decide what works need to be done to our homes? How do we do that at scale? And how do we do that in a way that assures quality and prevents unintended consequences? So through that, we've been looking a lot at whole house plans and also the importance of data. And this logbooks work really carries on from that. We also know that there's lots of people already working with or engaging with logbooks and passports within the industry. There are some Green Homes Finance Accelerator projects that are specifically embedding logbooks, and there are lots of others who are already providing these or thinking about working with them. So if you're someone that's looking at these tools yourself, please do tell us in the chat, because we'd love to build our database of people that are working in this space. So I'm going to now hand over to Louis, who's going to give us an introduction to the data element that we've included within our output on our website. So Louis, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Hello, everybody. Great to see so many people there. Let me share my screen and talk to you a little bit about this exciting output. Okay, hopefully that's, that's working well. All right, excellent. So yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sort of heat and energy in buildings database that we've put together. So what we did is to try and understand ultimately, quite simply, what data exists out there about buildings in Britain, with a particular focus on energy. And this is the result which you're seeing on the screen. So it's all organized by organizations that are holding the data. This is originally research that was commissioned by the Scottish Government. They wanted to understand how, in the future, they would be able to monitor compliance with upcoming energy efficiency standards. So as you all know, within the next few years, we're going to be getting new standards for energy efficiency It's a devolved matter, so they'll be different in England, in Wales, and in Scotland. The Scottish government wants to understand, okay, once these new regulations come out, how are we going to check that people have effectively installed a heat pump, or that they can connect to a heat network in the future, or that they've achieved a certain level of energy efficiency or fabric efficiency in the home. So the team that put together the information was made up of a company called IALA Impacts. There is CIC, there are Retrofit assessors and coordinators, and chartered surveyors, myself from Novoville, and the Professor Sean Smith from the University of Edinburgh. And what we did was simply to go out there over the course of a few months and ask people a set of questions. You know, there was a sort of standard questionnaire asking tons of questions about the data which they held. All of these questions can be seen directly on the matrix, and you can go and visit that at your leisure. We then, of course, gave people a chance to review the information that was on there. And this is still work in progress, okay? I think it's quite important to say that while we've already gathered about information about 30 odd organizations, we're still adding on to them. And if you're not on there, and if you do have building data of any kind, we really encourage you to get in touch with us so that we can enrich this for the benefit of the whole industry. So we originally did this, as I said, because, you know, government needs to understand how they're going to monitor compliance going forward. The short answer is that there is no database ready to hand that would allow them to do that. So they're going to have to maybe rebuild one or create a way to query these different databases for the information that they need. Ultimately, they're going to have to find a solution that's a problem for them. And that was one of the recommendations, or at least answers of that we produced in the report that we gave Scottish Government. But perhaps even more importantly, or more interestingly for the industry, I think this could be very helpful as a way to give everyone a sense of who you can work with, who you can partner with, you know, what data have do these different organizations have, how it can be useful to you, and try and really educate everybody basically about the state of affairs in the industry. I myself joined the sort of like housing, energy, and sort of retrofit industry only a few years ago, 3 to 4 years ago. And I know I would have quite liked to have a sort of primer explaining to me what all of these words mean, what all of these databases are, you know, who's got access to what, etc. So I think it would be quite a useful thing just to educate everybody in the sector. This is also helpful to try and understand what lies behind some of the commercial claims of organizations. And again, not so much to debunk those claims, but to educate everybody. And it's helpful to try and appreciate, you know, the various strengths and weaknesses of all the data that is out there. For example, if an organization is saying that they have coverage over the whole country, well, it's quite likely that they have measured coverage over perhaps about 60% of properties which have an EPC, and the remaining 40% would be modeled. It doesn't mean that the model data is bad, but it's just different, and it's good to understand what those differences are and what they mean. Similarly, we know at this point that most local authorities haven't published data on whether buildings are in a heat network zone. They're starting to publish it, but we don't have coverage over the whole country. And again, this is the kind of information you can get from this database. So in short, you know, you're going to see on there information about what data exists, who holds it, what's it good for, how can it be accessed, who owns it, is there a price associated to it, etc., etc. I think some of the sort of key questions that we've come across, or sort of once we've understood the state of play and what data is out there, some of the key questions that really come out is how do we index all of this data according to ideally the UPRN or perhaps some other means of indexing, but how do we create really one source of truth? How do we clean the data, deduplicate it? How do we try and create, yes, this ultimately one version of the truth for one property. And how do we do that in a context where not all of these data sets are always open in their access and can be chargeable by the people, the organizations that have been compiling them? How do we make this data actionable as possible for the homeowners and their consultants, while respecting all of the efforts that organizations have put into collating this data? So yeah, these are some of the questions that we think are quite salient after having done this work. But I welcome any questions you guys might have about this work.
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, there's a question in the chat, and I'll probably embellish on it a little bit, asking where the data is available. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how each of these databases are accessed and who might be able to access them, and is it different for different records and collections of data?
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is information about those databases. You will find on these cards the people, there's an email for the people that you need to get in touch with if you want to have access to the data, or if you want to talk about the data. All of them will have different access controls. Some of them will be chargeable, some of them will not. So it's on a case-by-case basis, and we've tried to put a contact detail there for all of them, basically.
And we have another question. Cara Naden from Somerset Council asks, how much of the data collation is automatic? Is any manually added, and how often is it verified and updated? I guess that's different, A, for the matrix that we've published, and B, for each individual entry within the matrix itself. But I don't know if you could talk a little bit about what you found from talking to each of the providers on how the data input gets updated.
I'll start by just talking about this. So at the moment, it's the National Retrofit Hub that controls the information that is on there, and this is fully manual. Okay, we just put information here as we get it after having curated it and after having spoken with the people managing those data sets. Can we just go back to that question again so that I can answer it in general, even though yes, the answer will be different for all of the different organizations?
Yeah. So Cara says, she's wondering how much of the data collation is automatic. Is any manually added, and how often is it verified and updated?
So I think, yeah, so the answer depends on, according to each data set. There is very little automation in the whole sector as a whole. If you think of after you've done an installation, according to PAS 2035, you'll need to lodge it with Trustmark. That's not automatic. But that is one way in which those data sets might be updated. Similarly, if you do an EPC, you need to lodge it. So there's a manual element there. So I think in the great majority of cases, it is manual. There is a lag, and there are a few that have a bit more automation, like for instance, potentially smart meter data. But in the vast majority, I would say it's quite a manual process.
Thanks, Louis. Another question here from Tracy Hart. Is the data only for dwellings, or is it also for non-residential buildings?
So no, there's a lot of data. There are cards here that pertain to non-domestic data and non-domestic analytics. I encourage you to go and have a look. And however, I will say that it's a known gap that we've spoken with perhaps less organizations that have non-domestic data. So there's probably less here than we would really like. But again, this is work in progress, so hopefully we can fill those gaps in the next few months.
Great. And then Mohammed asks, how can we ensure that the data is not abused for commercial purposes? I guess that comes back a little bit to who has access and how they can use it.
Yes, that's correct. I think that's a very important question. Ultimately, for every single data point that has ever been produced, associated to this data point is metadata. And part of that metadata is who's produced this, who owns it, and what are the sort of sharing provisions or permissions associated to that data point. And it's true that that's not always particularly clear, and it can be difficult to have the right answers. We've tried as much as possible to clarify what are the access control mechanisms, who owns the data, et cetera, et cetera. Again, every organization is going to have different rules, and for good reason. But that is indeed one of the things that we've tried to do is ask those questions, understand who owns the data and how can it be accessed, and and all of these questions, because they are super important. I agree.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Louis. I think we've come to the end of our questions in the chat. But yeah, thank you very much for giving us an overview there. If you would like to dive into that in more detail, please do go on the link on the website. You can expand all of these cards and find more information and also figure out the contact details for each of these people. Likewise, if you think that there are databases we're missing, please do get in touch on our info@ email address and we can look to add those as well. So thanks very much, Louis. And now we'll be handing over to Nigel.
I'm hoping your screens have all gone purple.
That's right. That's great.
Brilliant. So big thank you for the invite to speak, and thank you, Louis. I am the chair of the Residential Logbook Association, and just a little bit of background. We are the trade body and self-regulatory body for UK companies who are have either brought logbooks to market or are planning to bring logbooks to market. And we were set up in 2019 under the kind of auspices of the Ministry of Housing. And at the time, housing was under what was called MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Now, obviously, it's changed now. It's part of DLUC. But there were about 4 different logbook companies at the time. We were all walking the halls of the Ministry of Housing, trying to get meetings with civil servants, trying to get meetings with organisations like the Land Registry, and all failing miserably. And one day, one of the senior civil servants at the Ministry of Housing kind of took us all into a room, set a meeting up, and said to all of us, look, you're all trying to do similar things. You're all asking the same kind of questions. It's very hard for us to have any dealings with individual companies, but it's actually very easy for us to have dealings with a representative group. And so the RLBA was formed at that point. And we've gone on to work quite closely with the Ministry of Housing since then. We're now up to 6 companies. There's another 3 which we're kind of in the process of nurturing and bringing on board. And broadly, one of the things I would want to say is that all of the companies who are bringing logbooks to market or have launched logbooks are coming at it from slightly different starting points. So we have some companies who specialize in nothing but new build. And in new build, logbooks are taking the place of the old handover pack. If you bought a new flat or house in the past, you'd have been given a great big lever arch file full of paper documents, user manuals, guarantees, warranties, etc. And logbooks are replacing that function. We also have companies who have come out of the estate agent and conveyancing software industry, so have long heritage of dealing with conveyancers. And we have a couple of companies who come out of consumer services. So all the organizations have come at this from different directions. And what we're trying to do is work towards a shared vision, which can be encapsulated into shared and agreed data sets, whilst still promoting a competitive market. And one of the things that we're trying to do in the RLBA is ensure that there is a competitive and vibrant market for logbooks, which have very different propositions for different parts of the market. You can imagine that a logbook for a brand new flat in a shiny high-rise block will be very different from a logbook that's being used by a 18th century parsonage in the Cotswolds. The logbooks.
Nigel, just to sorry interrupt you there. I'm finding it fine to hear you, but we've had a few comments in the chat that they're finding it a bit difficult to hear you. So I don't know if you, I can hear you fine on my headphones, but I don't know if you're
I'll try and
speak up a little bit. Yeah.
I'll make sure that the microphone is clear in front of my face. There we are.
Thank you.
So I was saying, yeah. So we are imagining a market in which there are competitive logbook propositions with very different functionality, and we're trying to establish a framework for the market which doesn't impinge on the company's inability to innovate. But broadly, we are following an idea that the logbook market should deliver a logbook for every home in the country. So a secure digital record with key data, information on transactions, building work, maintenance, certification. So and if every home in the country had one of those, a lot of other policy problems being pursued by government would be solvable in a much easier way. We have spent a lot of time since 2019 working with the legal industry and the Law Society to make sure that logbooks are recognised as part of the legal record for a property, and that's key. You may or may not know that the old paper deeds that used to be given if you were the owner of a property, they were what the legal industry called dematerialized about 10 years ago, as in they're no longer a legal record. So we're looking for a logbook. If you are the owner and controller of a logbook, we want that to be seen as a evidence of legal possession. So the Law Society is spending a lot of time on the concept of digital assets with us. Logbooks should very much be under the control of the property owner. But we are spending a lot of time connecting them to as many of the public sector and industry data systems as possible. So Louis' list that we just saw, over time, we were looking for logbooks to be able to access directly via API as many of the data sets on that list as possible. And we, in that fight, the RLBA, to a certain extent, is representing homeowners. You'll see across various parts of the property industry, there's huge amounts of work going on in digitization, but a lot of it is actually business to business. And there's not a lot of work enabling the homeowner to have better information. That's absolutely key for us. And we're very keen that the logbook support a variety of activities, and I'll touch on that in a bit more detail. So the RLBA is working on projects in a number of areas. We're working on with the government on how to make logbooks a proof of ID and proof of ownership. We're doing a lot of work with the buying and selling industry. Now, you'll have seen across Europe that logbooks actually in other countries are being driven by the retrofit industry. In the UK, we've gone earlier on this, and up till now, it's been driven by the buying and selling industry. And a lot of the work and standards we've been doing has come out of the need for logbooks to help improve the conveyancing process and prevent property fraud. So they're the two kind of big drivers in the buying and selling industry of logbooks, and we're now coming to Retrofit, which is very exciting. The mortgage industry is very interested in logbooks. There's been calls from various mortgage industry bodies like the Building Societies Association for logbooks to be mandatory with all new mortgages, and there's some work in Germany to see if that's possible. So we're looking at that. Lettings and rental, I'll touch on in just a minute. As I've mentioned, new build is a big driver, and in the early years, new build was one of the drivers of take up of logbooks. We think across the UK, there's about 500,000 homes that have got a digital logbook of some form, and in the early years, new build was an early driver of that. And obviously, I will touch on Retrofit again in just a moment, what we're doing in the UK. But it's important to flag that in France and in Belgium now, and we believe later in the year in Ireland, that logbooks are now mandatory for all new build homes and all homes that have had a significant retrofit such that the EPC has changed. And so across Europe, the background context is that logbooks are starting to become mandatory in certain of these industry sectors. Finally, we're trying very hard to work with local government. It's been a bit hard to open up local government systems, but we would like everybody's logbook to be able to connect via API to their local government systems so that they're connecting to planning and building control records, etc. When we were working with DLUC, one of the things they first asked us to do was set up a self-regulatory process so that the conveyancing industry and the estate agent industry could have some level of comfort over the companies that they would be connecting to in the logbook world. And then after a couple of years back in 2020, Ministry of Housing came back to us. They're very worried about property fraud, and they're very worried about people setting up a logbook as evidence that they might own a property without it being some kind of proof. And so we work with them and have built a national register of logbooks. And this is now live, and we're slowly bringing all the RLBA members onto this. And this is something that the conveyancing industry is connecting to. And we're beginning to get this process whereby if you go to sell a property and you have a logbook, that your conveyancer and the estate agents have a very quick and easy ping to the register to make sure that if you're presenting a logbook as evidence of ownership, that it's the right logbook and the right owner. And so that's some of the work we're doing around logbooks being ideable. And on the register, we're also able to flag up if there are certain kinds of data set in that logbook. And just to give you an example, we have a core RLBA data standard, which all our members are kind of working towards having. It's very slim, it's not very big. It's UPRN, it's address, some location data, some property ID piece, and a small amount of construction info. And that's just the kind of the core ID. And what we've done is we've worked since 2019 with various industry sectors to come up with a data pack. And a data pack is what we call, it's like an expansion pack. If you are a logbook provider, you can choose or not to add extra functionality, but to do it in a way that's been agreed with an industry sector. So in buying and selling, there's some easy ones. There's a seller's pack. We didn't define this. This was defined by the Law Society. It's an agreed data standard and a set of documents that you need to sell a house. We've worked out how to incorporate that into logbooks. There's also a deeds pack. If you just bought a house, a conveyancer should upload into your logbook a standard data schema and a standard set of documents. And both of those were defined by the conveyancing industry, and we've incorporated them into logbooks. Same with new build. There's kind of a handover pack, which covers some of the requirements of the new home standard and the Building Safety Act, also how to hand over technical equipment like a home that's got solar power and heat pumps, etc. Those standards were defined by the new build industry. Same with lettings. There's a licensing pack that's been designed by, I think, the Lettings Industry Council, the TLIC. And so that's, if you are a logbook provider and you want people to be able to use your logbooks to help lettings, that is something that you can add on to your logbook should you wish to. And then the final thing is net zero and retrofit. And we've been working with various groups in the industry to look at what could and should be added to a logbook to accommodate all of the information created through retrofit. And obviously, the advent of the building renovation plan, the BRP, gives you a kind of a framework for something that could and should be added to a logbook if you're the kind of logbook company that wants to provide retrofit services. You can imagine a company who's specializing in new build won't be adding a BRP, a building renovation plan capability, onto their logbooks. If they're producing brand new homes, it's not relevant. So you can see this is like a menu of capabilities built into the core RLBA standard that all of our members can pick and choose which bits they choose to add. But if they choose to add a feature based on one of these standards, it has to be done to the standard agreed by the rest of the industry. I won't go into the details of how logbooks and BRPs work together, because that's exactly what Rachel's going to talk about in just a moment. So what I'll do, I'll use that as a chance to kind of hand over to Rachel or ask questions if people would like to ask them now.
Thanks very much, Nigel. That's given us some really great context there about the whole development of residential building logbooks, digital building logbooks. And yeah, we've got quite a lot of questions coming through in the chat. And I thought I'd start with one that I know has been a sort of one that often comes up. And is a good debate, but I wonder if you can sort of succinctly answer: is a building logbook and a building passport the same thing?
Yes, they are the same thing. And back in 2019, we had a long conversation between all the providers and the Ministry of Housing, and we looked at what was happening in Europe. The EU have decided to use the word logbook. And all of the EU research since 2000 is based on what they call DBLs, digital building logbooks, and in the UK we decided to use the same word. And so we're trying to. We have no problem with the use of the word passport in a brand, but we're very keen, if there's going to be take up of these things, for there to be clear definition in the consumer's mind about the product class. And so we don't use the word passport at all.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, it's good to get clear on terminology there. Another question that's come in is, you talked a little bit about this, and I think it's maybe looking for your reflection on it. Are logbooks likely to be mandatory for all homes in the UK? What's your feeling on that?
It's not on any government agenda at the moment. I can certainly make a very quick bit of logic about making them mandatory in the new build sector, and that's what's happened in various countries in Europe. I would be really surprised if any government goes as far as making all logbooks mandatory. I think they will probably edge towards it by making the exchange of certain bits of data mandatory. So around retrofit, if you have some retrofit work done, it will probably be mandatory to hand the homeowner certain kinds of data, and it will best be done in logbooks. But I haven't yet seen anything which indicates the UK government will go as far as making logbooks mandatory for all sectors and all property types.
Thanks, Nigel. A question I really like here from Mohammed: can logbooks be linked with material passports and circularity steps. I might talk a little bit about this in my presentation, but I don't know if you've got a feeling of how that might work and if it's something being considered by the industry.
Yes, and in our new build work group, we are looking at materials records as well. Again, another thing with the word passport slapped on it, which isn't a passport. You know, a passport has to be two things. It has to be issued by someone official, and it has to give you access to something, some place or some status that you can't have without it. And there isn't a single thing on the market with the word passport on it that does either of those two things. So we prefer not to use it. But if you're handing a new property to a new owner, it's absolutely logical in this day and age to give them a full manifest of all materials used to build that property. And we're looking at how those data sets can be created in such a way that they're meaningful and useful to a homeowner, and can be built into the legal record of the property. So absolutely yes, but I disagree with your terminology, Mohammed.
Thanks very much, Nigel. There's a lot of great work going on in the materials passport space that we're aware of. So I think next on our list is really to engage with some of the people that are doing that work.
Yeah.
Sam Foster asks 2 questions. One, how might digital logbooks dovetail with Scottish building standard requirements for written information? I don't know whether you or Louis know much about that.
So just an overview, and I'll let Louis kind of tail on it. The design of a logbook actually needs to be very different in England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And actually, there are times when England and Wales are slightly different, particularly around things like the Building Safety Act. So for those logbook companies who are looking to make sure that we are delivering a standard service across the whole of the UK, we've had to localise quite heavily. So yes, somebody opening a logbook in Scotland theoretically should have access to different data structures and also to point at different data sources. So a different EPC data source, a different land registry. There's a lot of difference in property data around the UK, and we're trying to manage it. It's complicated. So I don't know if Louis got better Scottish experience than me. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I didn't have anything to add to that particular point, no.
Thanks, Louis. We'll ask one more question now. There's a few others that have come in, but I think they might be better to ask after I've sort of done a bit of a presentation as well, because they'll tie in with both pieces of work. So I guess the final one I'll ask is, what discussions are being held with insurers regarding the logbooks? And Sam particularly sees that there might be potential here for embedding annual maintenance within them.
So yes to both. Where the insurance industry is very interested they're interested in getting better data. I think if you speak to insurance companies and to mortgage companies, both those types of organisation are looking at risk management, and they believe as organisations that they can improve their own risk and their own commercial risk by having better data on the properties that they're either mortgaging or they're insuring. And so the nature of the conversation we're having with those industries is how they can, with homeowner permission, get access to more data from a logbook, which makes them able to do their job better and manage their books, as they call them, better. So a lot of it is about a data exchange. We would like to get to the point where somebody with a logbook can create a block of information to put into the insurance market. If you want your home reinsured, you should be able to create a pack of info out of your logbook, temporarily make it available to any insurer to quote on, and then once you've got a quote and a new insurer, close that information down again. So it's very much about when and where a homeowner could and should be able to share data out of a logbook with those industry organisations like utilities and insurance companies who might want access to it.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Sounds really powerful. Please do stick around. You'll have the opportunity to ask Nigel and me a few more questions at the end, but we're going to move on to the final part of the session, which will be me running you through a document that we've just published on digital building logbooks and retrofit. So you should hopefully see that in full screen now. So what we started realizing within our working group 1 was that digital building logbooks could have a potentially really pivotal role in helping scale up retrofit across the UK. And what we wanted to do was understand what might needed to be added to a logbook to help it enable that retrofit, how might they need to be scaled in order for that to happen. And also we wanted to give people in the retrofit industry who might not be working with these tools a bit of an overview of what they are and what the potential for them is. So this is available on the website, and I'm going to talk you through it now. So to start with, really key here is that when you're creating a retrofit plan, you need to incorporate a lot of different data and information so that you can make a plan that's really relevant to the home that you're looking at, to the occupants, meeting the specific outcomes that you're targeting. So obviously you need to include information on the building fabric and services, the size of the building, the energy use data, the existing state of repair. Lots of this would come from your retrofit assessment, but there are pieces of data that could be pulled from elsewhere to help you. Occupancy information, really important to try and help you define what you're trying to achieve with your retrofit, as well as user preferences and physical constraints. But alongside that, we think it's really important that we start to consider things like local area energy plans, local grid capacity, future climate data, so that we're planning in climate resilience, heritage planning, and also national carbon budgets. Fundamentally, we want all of the work that we're doing to be able to achieve the targets that we have on reducing carbon emissions. But right now, it's really difficult for most designers, specifiers, companies to access all of this data in a way that isn't going to take them far too long. The retrofit plan itself is also a really powerful document should it be aggregated. Aggregated retrofit plans could provide lots of information to people like policymakers, financial providers, people in local areas who are looking to aggregate projects like community advocacy groups. They could also provide some sort of supply chain certainty, so that if you could say there's a certain postcode in Wolverhampton where 2,000 people have external wall insulation in their retrofit plan, that might allow you to start building a supply chain to meet that in that area, but also to aggregate projects and increase efficiencies. And within Working Group 1, we started to think that potentially these digital building logbooks that could contain this information and categorize these different inputs could act as a central part for some of the other work we were doing. So we were looking at stock modeling and building data and how important that is when we're looking at scaling up retrofit. We were also looking at the design guidance, things like archetypes and pattern books, and how we might understand how to use those in a risk managed approach and how to apply those to buildings. And also the quality assurance element and the data capture, having a place that can be stored would be really essential to really making sure that we're doing things in a way that can be scaled but with low risk. So we thought that the digital building logbook felt like a really important central character in this picture. As Nigel's mentioned, there's lots of people that have been doing great work here. He's talked through what the RLBA have been doing. They've also been working with the Home Buying and Selling Group, who have helped to define some of the standards for the collection and the storage and the transfer of the data. The Green Finance Institute has been doing a lot of engagement here. They published a document called Building Renovation Passports, Creating the Pathway to Zero Carbon Homes. And they've already started to identify what needs to go into a logbook in order to unlock some of the retrofit journey. Climate Exchange is a body in Scotland that's done some research on the potential for logbooks to impact the way that we do retrofit, and they have come to the conclusion that these could be a really positive tool. And then in Europe, the IB Road project has been helping to understand how building renovation roadmaps could be created. And as Nigel mentioned, really the journey there is starting with the renovation roadmap and how that could create a logbook, whereas we've maybe more started with the conveyancing side. So in a way, we're further ahead in one direction, and maybe in Europe, they're further ahead in another. And there's lots to learn from both sides. So yeah, as Nigel mentioned, we've got some schemas already defined around the basic property information. That's what you would need to buy and sell a home, the title plan, the EPC, information on insurance and heritage and fittings. That's part of the logbook that already exists. What we've identified is that we think that there are a need for a series of different parts of the logbook which would then help unlock retrofit scale. The first one would be local data. So thinking about local health metrics, income and poverty, local area energy plans, the grid capacity, future climate risk. That could all go into a logbook so that you could access that more easily. In-use performance data could be included, and that could be linked to quality assurance and confirming the outcomes from retrofit works. That could be smart meter data, but it could also be anything from internal sensors like air quality and thermal comfort. And then the enhanced property data. So this is what you would think of as the information coming out of a retrofit assessment. So the fabric of the building, the build-ups, the services, the condition of age of different elements, the form factor of the building, the junctions. If there have been certified works done, that would be able to include that as well. So you'd be able to evidence that for your financial requirements, and also any climate resilience measures included. The occupancy is also an interesting one, slightly more complicated because it might not be shared in the same way, and there are different permissions around that. But understanding the use type, the occupancy numbers, the occupancy patterns would be really valuable to help ensure that you're planning the right measures within the building renovation plan. And then, finally, the building renovation plan. So this is what would be the medium-term improvement plan if you're following the PASS process. It would be the document that comes from the retrofit coordinator, the retrofit designer, the retrofit company, and this could be a phased approach to retrofit, but taking a whole house approach, and it could include repairs and maintenance. These different components can then link to connections, so they could make you connections with local area energy networks and community advocacy groups, different government schemes and aggregated projects, but also they have the potential to automatically connect you to eligible funding, to finance and incentives. The role that we as the National Retrofit Hub would really like to play is to help define the framework for each of these sections in orange, bringing together people that are already working on these documents to understand what information do they need, what information are they already including, what standards do we need to embed so that every piece of information that you produce can be stored together and aggregated. And in that way, we can make sure that all the people that are working on different types of logbooks and different types of information are producing information that can be transferred and also read together. And the way that this also needs to work is that it's not one stationary document that stores everything in one place. It accesses data via API through databases, live drawing that down. It could have inputs from different people, and there are some logbook providers who are thinking about whether different confidence ratings are given to different pieces of information depending on who's added it. We think this could overcome a number of barriers to retrofit at scale, so I'm going to talk through a few of these. First up, the fact that current solutions and one-by-one design is not scalable at the pace we need. There are barriers around cost, and there are also difficult to access incentives that are linked to building performance. So we think the connections piece is really key to allow logbooks to aggregate projects and to provide easier access to finance. We also know that there's opportunities missed to incorporate local area energy planning, health metrics, and future climate risk into retrofit plans. So we think that by providing that information, it could be more readily planned for. We know that they're around policy. At the moment, that's really based on EPCs. It's not particularly accurate data, and there's really no guarantee that current policy is going to hit our net zero and health outcomes. So by providing real evidence of the outcomes of retrofit and the real and use performance data, we could define better policy that could be sure of hitting our targets. We also think that the logbooks has the potential to streamline some of the quality assurance process. So we know quality assurance is really, really important. We want to avoid unintended consequences, but often it includes a lot of upfront work. So if you've already got the information embedded in your logbook, you've already got the components of your retrofit assessment in your enhanced property data, you've already got your components of your medium-term improvement plan in your building renovation plan, you've already got your in-use performance recorded, we start to streamline the process and make sure that if you're doing multiple rounds of retrofit, you don't have to keep repeating the same processes. We think that there's a lot of potential as well to help unlock supply chain certainty through logbooks and also enable some of the more circular flows of material by including information on what materials are already in the building and what materials will be needed and allowing the aggregation of that at a local level. We think as well that these documents could give the potential to embed repair and maintenance within retrofit strategies, which sometimes are missed. And finally, there would be opportunities to make sure that if you're a householder and you're approaching a builder to do an extension for you, a lot of the time those people are asking about energy efficiency works, but there's not always the skill and confidence for those works to be incorporated at the pace that's needed. But if you were to go to a builder and say, okay, I want to have an extension done, and they were able to look at your building renovation plan and see, okay, well, the next phase on your renovation plan includes these steps. Why don't we add that to the project? It might be a much more streamlined way of doing that. In the same way, you could plan for boiler failure. So you're not making a distress purchase. Your logbook is telling you your boiler is going to probably fail in about 5 years. Here are the steps that you need to go through before you can replace that with a heat pump. And it gives you a route to doing that in a more straightforward way. And as Nigel mentioned, there are already expansion packs to logbooks, and we think the retrofit pack could sit alongside this. Please do have a look at the document. We've already held roundtables with potential stakeholders where we've asked them lots of different questions about who might pay, how do they need support in adopting logbooks, how could we ensure that the contents are accessible, and we've also had many questions from our working groups which we've also tried to answer in the document. So please do take a look at these in some more detail. And I think now Sarah, my co-director, is going to come on and ask some questions that have been put in the chat.
Yes, I am. You've got a couple which I think you've already spoken to, but I have seen this so many times, and I still just get so excited at the potential that's within this sort of like framing of how we can bring this data together. And I think the conversation in the chat is probably reflecting that same thing, where people are, their synapses are firing. So let me get to one that actually Nigel was helping answering some of these in the chat. But one I think that was really useful, is this one from Matt Davies. Is the vision for a single database / organization holding all of this information, or rather a way to connect to it and share the data? And I think you have, but just expand on that one a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit utopian to think that there would ever be a single place with every bit of data in it. So we've always worked on the idea that there's this kind of archipelago of data sources out there, and that a logbook could and should be the place where a homeowner can bring it all together into a single place and then share it with whoever needs to see it. And so we're kind of moving to the idea of having this live dashboard piece within a logbook. So somewhere where either records data like Fencer data or EPC data can be seen, or live data like smart meter data can be accessed. We need to solve this ID piece, because there's a lot of data sources out there that won't share at the moment. So trust in the retrofit world, for instance, Trustmark won't share their data with householders. So they may hold a whole load of information on retrofit lodgements that happened at your home, but they won't share it with you because they've got no way of checking your ID. So we're working on a project with Trustmark at the moment for, if you've got a logbook that is from an RLBA member and is on the register, so that they can see that the logbook's had its ID checked, and they know it's the right logbook for the home and the owner, they will release data into the logbook on previous retrofit measures, for instance. And that's a great example of where a verified logbook gets you access to data that you couldn't normally have access to, and can present it in a way that then can be shared by the homeowner, if they're having further retrofit work done. So we want the homeowner to have as much information as possible that exists in this archipelago of data, and for the homeowner to be able to choose when and where to share it with retrofit advisors or retrofit installers on their own terms. So, okay,
Rachel, did you want to add anything to that?
I think for me, the important thing is that we don't make lots of siloed information. So the logbook may well hold some information and lots of it will be drawn to it. I think it's really important that the information that's accessed is dynamic, so that it's has the ability to change. So yeah, I think it's definitely the second option, but the idea that they also enable, if you buy a home that's with one logbook provider, you can transfer to another one, or you can combine information from another provider so that it's all interoperable together. And I think that framework's really important to enable different companies to give different offers, but in a way that speaks the same language to one another.
Yeah, having that consistent baseline of what the actual minimum is in terms of the data that's necessary. And it's that background framework, it's that bit that underpins everything else, so that, the innovation that's out there from the commercial side as well that need to, you know, make their businesses out of this. That's also not prevented, but what we are conscious of is that like quality information and data that sits behind it, and that interoperability, I think, between the data sets. And I know you mentioned API before, and I don't really understand API, but as I understand it, it's like talk to each other, data ability, right?
I think that's the level to which we need to understand it, Sarah.
Yeah, just bringing in a little bit of leveling there from all of your wonderful minds.
Sorry, and I'm a marketing person. I really shouldn't be talking about APIs at all. I'm a total non-techie.
Well, I think that's an important thing to do, to just say like what we're trying to do here is just make all this data work together so that we're able to make better decisions. And also there's all sorts of wonderful magic that can happen beyond that. Like once you have all that data together, other things can emerge as well. Tracy asks, and I think Rachel, you did talk about it in one of the slides, but is there any kind of carbon data to be included? And I think it's a simple answer, yes, but
we'd love to. We just need someone else to specify how a home gets, you know, a schedule of carbon, embodied carbon, and we'll include it in the logbook. I mean, it's not for the logbook companies to define how that happens, but we would love to. If there's a good way of doing it, we will incorporate it in the logbooks. Particularly for new build, I think we're beginning to see new build buyers begin to ask questions about what the homes are made of. Never used to. But there's a much more intelligent kind of questioning coming out from new build buyers now. They want to know what the home is made of, how it, for the first time, starting to think about how it performs without really having the language yet. But you know, you can see the consciousness is getting in there with people when they're buying a new home. They recognise they're buying something that they should know more about.
And I guess, I mean, that's talking about embodied carbon data, which I think, you know, the potential to incorporate the material information would help that. But in terms of operational carbon, that could definitely be something that came out of the in-use performance data, but maybe also the building renovation plan could include within it projections for carbon reductions, which would be really helpful to unlock funding as well, because that's the thing that a lot of banks need when they finance these projects, is to understand the impact that solutions are make on the carbon emissions of the building. So I think that could be quite a powerful thing to include.
And mortgage companies are being pushed by the government to be able to report on the carbon performance of the homes on their mortgage book, and they've got no way of doing it.
Just as you said that, Alistair Galloway posted, some of the interest comes from lenders pushing green mortgages. So yes, exactly. I think, yeah.
And accountability. The government is saying to lenders, you know, what are you doing to improve the carbon performance of the homes on your mortgage book? And the lenders are staring blankly back at government because they've got no way of monitoring or reporting. And so we're saying to the lending community, look, we can, with homeowners' permission, we can connect logbooks to your systems. And if we could agree a set of reporting measures, then we could exchange live data through this. So you could begin to see, if you give somebody a green loan, you can see the impact on the EPC and the carbon performance, and you could report that back into your book, which you report to government. So a beautiful kind of exchange of data through the process.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've covered nearly all. There's one, how will you ensure there are no problems with addresses being known as different names in different databases, UPRN, unique property number, or other ways?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You can imagine this never used to be a problem because in the old days, databases didn't interconnect. You know, even if they never did. But obviously, interoperability is now this mantra of this world we're all living in, and suddenly everyone's realizing that the data sets don't overlay nicely. So I know that government were brought up short on this because they were talking to the Ordnance Survey, the Post Office, and the Land Registry about making their data sets more interoperable, and they kind of overlaid all three data sets and found they didn't match.
Yeah.
So there's a very large scale problem behind that question, which is needs to be solved. The logbook companies, we have latched onto UPRNs, and it's the unifying ID for a property. So the unique property reference number is going to be an important number in the future, and it's the one that theoretically should cross all those data sets. The Land Registry still refuses to use them, even though it's mandated by government. So there's a massive fight going on in the home buying and selling industry about Land Registry's inability or unwillingness to use UPRNs. So one thing I would recommend everybody is just keep your eye on what's happening in lots of other parts of the property industry and think about how it affects what we do with retrofit.
Okay.
I think I was just going to come in on that and say, I think the complexity around what do we call an individual building shows just how this is not going to be a simple thing. You know, your address, you would imagine that's one simple piece of information that should have one way of recording it, but it's not. So we know that, you know, embedding the elements that are needed to unlock retrofit is going to be complicated. And Tracy's put in the chat, would it be helpful to include a basic building energy model, for example, through Design PH? I think the answer to that is more than likely yes, but I think the next step is to think about, for us, what are all the standards out there and how can they be embedded in this? So we know there's a new British standard come out on retrofit assessments. We know that the past standard requires certain types of information to go into different assessments. We know that there are different ways people are producing information via SAP. So I think part of it is putting all these people in a room that are doing things in different ways and saying, how can we create a framework that's flexible enough that would work for all these different ways of doing things and record all the information that you're producing? The idea would be, if you're producing some information on a building, should have a place to live within this. But how can we make it structured enough that it means that things work together? So that's the big challenge, I think.
Exactly. There's one key point on that data sharing. Apologies, so I've just jumped in.
Oh, go ahead.
There is a project that's underway it's come out of the home buying and selling industry, but it actually originally has come out, as all the people involved have come out of the open finance industry. And it's about creating a thing they're calling the property data trust framework. And the idea is to create provenance around data. So if I've got a logbook and I employ a retrofit assessor and I want to share data from my logbook with the assessor, how does the assessor know that information is actually accurate? Or if it's still in date, and all those kind of questions. And this is something that the banks had to solve just to enable the open banking revolution that we're all enjoying, on a personal basis. And the idea is that we should be able to look at data in a logbook, and we should be able to click on a piece of data and it should say, where did it come from? So this data was uploaded by the homeowner. I'm not sure I want to trust it. This data was uploaded by a RIC surveyor, but it was done 10 years ago. So, okay, it was probably accurate then, but I might just check if it's still accurate. Or, this data was uploaded by a retrofit assessor with this qualification a week ago. So
I think that was what was interesting when I was learning about, like, way back when I was having initial conversations with Louis and talking about confidence ratings on data. So there's a couple of questions that have kind of emerged in the chat around considering allowing homeowner data to be useful. And it is absolutely useful when you're living in the home to understand where weak spots are or whether work has happened. And actually a lot of the plan builders right now will allow you to make those adjustments to the data that is available that you can adjust and pull back. And so having that data trust network, the provenance, the checking, the confidence ratings, whatever systems those things are, allows for all of that to come through and for it to be given whatever weighted responsibility or as risk flags, actually, to say, hang on a minute, we probably need to double check this. And there's some,
and I think Louis got that in his logbook feature. They've got the risk flags already. And the PDTF group, they've got 4 levels of risk, from a homeowner just uploaded this themselves, which is almost zero confidence, through to not just the date and the source of it, but actually a link to a live copy of it is kind of the most trustworthy.
So I think we're 1 minute to 2, and I'm going to pass back over to Rachel to sort of round up and close out. But really fascinating, and I can see lots of very excited people who've been engaging with it. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you so much, Nigel and Louis, for contributing to the session. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that it's been useful. If you are working on logbooks yourself, if you are working on standards, if you're working on the collection of data and want to engage further, please do get in touch with us. We want to do more work on this with our audience. So please do get in touch, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. And bye, everyone.